In this video I will try to install a real lower on a Wei-Tech M16A1. I've seen the result of people doing this for other platforms with proper equipment. I don't have that. This is not a how-to, this is more of a how not to. So the question is, can I do this for my Wei-Tech and using only my semi-pro makeshift mill with zip ties? Or will the ladies start calling me Three-Fingered Pete? Let's find out. I start by assessing where I need to modify. The Wei-Tech upper and the real steel lower fits like a glove. Surprisingly, the magwell works without any adjustment. So far, so good. Let's inspect the trigger housing. Oh dear, this will require some serious time and effort. To turn the real lower into a functioning airsoft lower, I need to remove the excess material from inside the trigger housing. I use a mill and drill to remove large chunks of material. The detailed work, however, will be done with a Dremel and file. There is basically a lot of excess material in the real steel trigger housing that's got to go if I am ever going to get my airsoft trigger group in there. So, here we have the WE on the bottom and the real steel lower on the top. And the difference between them is the thickness of the side walls, the height and shape of the magwell wall, the height and length of the rear trigger group retention, and the size of the trigger hole. All this must be slimmed down to accommodate the Wei-Tech trigger group. Since my goal is to fit the Wei-Tech trigger group in the lower, I will remove the internals to make testing the fitment easier. Otherwise the trigger will get in the way, causing false feedback. Want to know how it's done? Check out our disassembly video on the WE trigger group. Now I can't procrastinate anymore. Affixing the lower in my semi-pro makeshift mill with zip ties. I can't recommend this setup, but desperation makes for funny bedfellows. Please use a proper milling machine and personnel. Time to roughly mill out the excess material. May any space grandpa be with me. I begin by thinning out the side walls. There's a couple of things I am wary about. First, the fire selector reinforcement, which is tricky dicky since it has so much mass. Slow and steady and a ton of passes will have to do. Maybe I should have drilled instead. The second thing is how far back I should mill, since in the process I am cutting down the rear trigger group retention slightly. If I remove too much material, there won't be any space for a screw, securing the rear of the trigger group in place. Knowing all that, I still messed it up. More on that later. The third thing, and the trickiest part, is the mag wall. I want to get as close as possible, but never ever mill the inside of the wall, since it is millimeter thin, and close to the mag release hole. It's better to stop in time and use a Dremel, drill and file for squaring off the round edges left by the mill. I'm not saying it happened to me, but being too greedy can turn your lower into Swiss cheese. I call it an extra ventilation hole. Since my setup is limited, I decided to split up the work into 3 depths, making one full pass at each depth. This is a high precision game, so I repeatedly double check as I go. The next obstacle is that the real lower doesn't have any space for the valve knocker, like the Wei-Tech one, for obvious reasons. Real mags don't use green gas. This would be risky to mill, so I set the depth on my drill with the help of some masking tape and remove as much material as I dare. Apparently I am a cautious general. This makes it a lot easier to cut through the mag wall and finish it up with my detail tools. Finally, I am back to the rear trigger group retention, and where I messed up royally. since I was stupid and guesstimated where the screw was located instead of drilling it out in the beginning. You can see here on the Airsoft lower that the wall should be just about 1.5 mm thick. It was a bad day to guesstimate. There's nothing to do but work with what I've got. And apparently I've got too little. Even though I removed too much material, the trigger group still does not fit, since mill is round and corners are square. I use the same technique as before, and drill away material from all 4 corners of the trigger housing. Then finish off with the Dremel. I continue on with my detail work throughout the trigger housing, smoothing out any rough spots to make it fit. Not only to prevent damage to the trigger group, but also to make my mistakes less obvious. When I'm happy, I also machine the rear trigger group retention to the correct height. And again do some detailed work. Time to enlarge the trigger hole in accordance with Wei-Tech specs. I carefully use a drill to get a nice rounded edge in the back of the hole. The remaining material can be removed with a file. Moment of truth. It fits like a glove-ish. Finally, I decide to drill the cursed hole. I use the trigger group as a template and drill down to the correct depth. As I said earlier, I should have done this before anything else. And here is the proof. There was too little material and I punched through the wall like a chest burster. John Hurt can relate. I grab myself by the bootstraps and decide to drill past my mistake, so I can use a longer screw. Then I tap in 3 mm and install the trigger group with a 16 mm M3 screw, which I cut down to the perfect length. It's rock solid. I will use the Wei-Tech front and rear takedown pins, mag catch, body pin, fire selector, plus the Wei-Tech bolt catch. Everything fits smoothly, apart from the pin for the rear steel bolt catch, which is smaller than the Wei-Tech one. So I replace it with a 2 mm wide and 12 mm long spring pin. The empty holes for the autosear and the trigger pin looks a bit off, so I 3D print 4 dummies, install them on the lower with a bit of glue, dab a bit of silver paint on them, and finish off by scratching them slightly to give a worn look. But any old thing you can jam in there will probably work. That's what she said anyways. The last thing on this soul-crushing build is to take a look at the hole for the buffer retaining pin. There are no threads there for an Airsoft retaining pin to hold on to, so I install a real one. So here it is, a fully converted, real steel M16A1 lower for Airsoft use. Let's ooh and ah as she turns, proving that it can be done with only a semi-pro setup, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, ever, period. The inside looks kinda tattered and worn down, but the outside is lovely, just like me. The real steel lower looks good on its own, but incorporated on a newly made Wei-Tech replica with odd color choice, it begets a forced look. This will not do. Plans are afoot. We march for eBay tonight. Next time on Special Weapons and Plastic. I'm 2 seconds away from an aneurysm, but I get a grip and lots of butt stuff. If you can't wait, check out our other videos. Please share and subscribe.